The night my mother-in-law smiled and told me I needed to find somewhere else to live. I was 3 days away from paying her mortgage for the 14th month in a row. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, the one I'd picked out at a place in Kensington Market, the one I'd carried a balance on my credit card for 2 months to buy, and she folded her hands like she was delivering good news. Her voice was gentle, almost kind. She said her son needed to focus on the family and that my presence was making things complicated. She said it the way someone says the weather is changing, like it was simply true and I should accept it and move along. My name is Jess. I'm 31 years old. I'm a project coordinator at a mid-sized construction firm in Toronto, and I've been working since I was 16. I say that not to brag, but because it matters to everything that comes next. I married my husband Owen 4 years ago. We met through mutual friends, fell in love fast, the way you do in your mid-20s when you're still optimistic about people. He was warm and funny, and the kind of person who remembered what you ordered at your favorite restaurant without being told. I loved him. I really did. I want to be clear about that before I tell you what happened, because it's easier to explain what I did if you understand I wasn't acting out of anger. I was acting out of clarity. When Owen's father passed away 2 years into our marriage, things shifted. His mother, I'll call her my mother-in-law because that's all she ever really was to me, was not handling the grief well, which is understandable. Losing a partner after 35 years is something you bounce back from in a few months. Owen suggested we move in with her temporarily, just to make sure she wasn't alone, just until she found her footing. Temporary. That word again. I agreed. I want to be honest about that. I said yes. I packed up our apartment in Leslieville, put half our furniture in storage, and moved into her house in Scarborough. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard she was proud of and talked about constantly from May to October. What I didn't understand at the time was that temporarily helping Owen's mother would quietly become indefinitely subsidizing a household of 4 adults, because it wasn't just my mother-in-law in that house. It was also Owen's younger brother Nathan, who was 26, and between jobs in a way that had started to feel permanent, and Nathan's girlfriend, who had moved in 6 months before we did, and had somehow never moved out. 4 adults. 1 income that was actually consistent, mine. Owen had been laid off 8 months after we moved in. The tech sector contraction hit his company hard, and he was one of the first to go. I told him not to panic. I told him we'd figure it out. I meant it. That's what marriage is. You hold the weight when the other person can't. But months passed, then more months. Owen applied to jobs, or said he did. He took on some freelance contracts, sporadic things that covered maybe a quarter of what he used to earn. The rest fell to me, and I covered it without complaint, because I thought it was temporary, because I thought we were building towards something. The mortgage on that Scarborough house was $2,100 a month. Property taxes broken into monthly installments added another $380. Utilities, hydro, gas, internet, water, averaged about $600 through the winter. I was buying most of the groceries, which for 4 adults ran close to $900 a month. Then there was the water heater rental, the lawn care service my mother-in-law didn't want to give up, the streaming subscriptions, the occasional household repair. I paid for a new washer when the old one broke. I paid for 2 new windows when the contractor said they were losing heat. I paid for the carbon monoxide detectors the city inspection flagged. I did the math one night in February, sitting at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. I opened a spreadsheet. I went back through 14 months of bank statements and credit card records. The number was $5,400 a month on average. Some months less. A few months more. Over 14 months, I had contributed just over $75,000 to a household I didn't own, in a house where I had no legal claim to anything. I closed the laptop and went to bed and didn't say a word. Here's what nobody in that house understood about me. I grew up watching my parents fight about money every single week. I learned very young that financial silence is not the same as financial peace. I kept quiet not because I was passive. I kept quiet because I was paying attention. And by February, I had been paying attention for a very long time. My mother-in-law had opinions about many things. She had opinions about how I loaded the dishwasher, how I hung towels in the bathroom, how I hadn't started thinking about children yet at 31, which she said casually over dinner in a way that made the air in the room go thin. She had opinions about my job, not that it wasn't good, but that it kept me late and that a home should have someone in it during the day. She said that like a house needed a keeper and like she was already imagining the rotation. Nathan's girlfriend once said, in earshot, that it must be nice having a sister-in-law with a good salary. She laughed when she said it. Nathan laughed too. I smiled. I was very good at smiling. And then came March. My mother-in-law called a family dinner. She cooked, which she did sometimes on Sundays, a roast and potatoes, the kind of meal that's meant to soften news. Owen sat beside me. Nathan and his girlfriend were already eating before everyone was seated. My mother-in-law waited until the first round of plates had been cleared before she started. She said she'd been thinking about the future. She said the house felt right for raising children, and that Nathan and his girlfriend were expecting. She let that sit for a moment, long enough for me to understand the congratulations were secondary, and that they would need the space. The main bedroom. More privacy. She looked at me when she said it, not at Owen. She said, "You understand, don't you? You and Owen could find a nice apartment. Lots of lovely places near the subway now. You and Owen. Like we were a unit being reassigned. Like she was doing us a favor by suggesting we go live somewhere else. In a city where a 2-bedroom apartment near transit runs $2,800 a month minimum on one income because Owen still wasn't consistently employed." Owen said nothing. I looked at him and waited. He looked at his plate. I said, "Of course." I said I'd start looking into options. I said it clearly and pleasantly, and with no indication of what was already forming in my mind. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was upset, or not only because of that, but because I was making a list. An actual list. In a notes app on my phone, in the dark, while Owen breathed steadily beside me. By morning, I had 13 items. I got up early, made coffee, and waited for Owen to come downstairs. When he did, I handed him a mug and asked if he'd had a chance to think about what his mother had said. He said yeah, and that it made sense, and that we could probably find something decent if we started looking soon. He said it like the whole thing was logistical, like the only question was square footage. I asked him if he planned to say anything to her. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "She asked us to leave our home, Owen." He said it wasn't really our home. I said, "I've been paying the mortgage on it for over a year." He went quiet in a way that told me he hadn't done that math, or hadn't wanted to. I kissed him on the cheek. I told him I'd handle it. I went to work. On my lunch break, I made 2 calls. The first was to a moving company. The second was to my accountant. What happened next took 11 days, which is how long it takes to carefully, legally, and thoroughly untangle yourself from a household you've been quietly holding together. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. I went to work every day. I came home, made dinner twice, helped my mother-in-law carry in groceries from her car once. I was pleasant. I was present. I gave no indication that anything had changed. On day 8, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in the East End. 12th floor, big windows, mine. On day 10, I arranged for movers to come on a Saturday morning when I knew Owen had plans with a friend and my mother-in-law went to her weekly thing at the community center. On day 11, a Saturday, the movers arrived at 9 a.m. I want to tell you what it felt like to watch that happen, because I think it matters. It didn't feel triumphant, it felt necessary, like setting a bone. Painful in a clean, directional way. I walked through the house methodically. The dining table, mine, purchased on my visa in November 2 years ago, receipt saved. The stand mixer on the kitchen counter, mine. The good cast iron pan, the coffee maker, the extra set of bed linens, the bathroom cabinet I'd installed myself with a drill I'd borrowed from a coworker, The new shower curtain rod, the welcome mat, the 3 lamps in the living room, the couch. My mother-in-law had mentioned that couch to her friends. She'd called it our new couch at a gathering last fall. I had said nothing. I let her have the moment. But the receipt was in my files, paid in full on my debit card, and it was absolutely coming with me. I was taping the last box in the bedroom when I heard a key in the front door. Owen wasn't supposed to be back for hours, but there he was, standing in the hallway, staring at the living room like he'd walked into the wrong house. Jess. What is this? He said it flatly. Not a question, more like a system error. I'm moving out, I said, today. He laughed once, the way people do when they're hoping something is a joke. You're not serious. My mother said you had 2 weeks. There it was. My mother said, not are you okay? Not I should have said something at dinner. Not I'm sorry. Just my mother said, as though she were the authority on my timeline. I looked at him for a moment. I really looked. He seemed more confused than worried, more inconvenienced than hurt. I said, you didn't say anything at that dinner. He said he didn't know what I wanted him to say. I said something, anything. That you disagreed. That you wanted to talk about it first. That I mattered more than the awkwardness of contradicting her. He rubbed the back of his neck. He said she wasn't wrong, that the space would be better used. I stopped him there. I picked up my phone and opened my banking app. I turned the screen toward him and let him look. He started reading the transfer amounts, the dates, the labels I'd put on each one. Mortgage, gas bill, hydro, groceries, water heater, window replacement. I watched his face as he scrolled. You paid for all of this? He finally said. I said, you never asked where the money came from. He started to say something, and then my mother-in-law's car came up the driveway. We both heard it. Owen straightened up. I closed my banking app and picked up my bag. She came in through the garage entrance and stopped short at the emptiness. The walls were bare. The rugs were rolled up by the door. 2 movers were carrying the couch out through the front. She said, what is going on? I said, I'm moving out, like you suggested. Her voice sharpened. She said this was entirely unnecessary and that we'd said I had time and that she'd expected us to handle this like adults. I said, that's interesting. She told me to stop them. She pointed at the movers like they were misbehaving. One of them looked at me. I shook my head slightly. They kept walking. She said, you can't just take things from this house. I set a folder on the kitchen counter, printed pages, tabbed, every major purchase I'd made in 14 months with receipts and bank records attached. I said, these things were never the house's, they were mine. Her face changed, not to anger, not immediately. First to confusion, then to something that looked almost like recalculation. Owen was very quiet. Nathan's girlfriend appeared in the hallway, took in the scene, and said, is everything okay? No one answered her. I picked up the folder. I'd made a copy for them, and left it on the counter. Then I picked up my bag, thanked the movers for their work, and walked out. I did not cry in the car. I'm not saying that to sound strong. I'm saying it because I genuinely wasn't sad in that moment. I was something else. Resolved, maybe. The grief came later, at night, in the new apartment with nothing in it but a mattress on the floor and a lamp. I cried then. For the marriage I'd wanted, the partnership I'd assumed we had, the version of Owen I'd fallen in love with, who would never have sat at that table and said nothing. But I got up the next morning and I was fine, because there was still work to do. My accountant called me Monday. I'd asked her to review everything, to see where I stood. She's thorough, the kind of professional who reads every line. On Tuesday she called me back, and her voice had a particular quality to it, a professional care, like someone handling good news very gently. She told me that several of the home improvement expenses, the windows especially, and a bathroom renovation I'd funded 18 months ago, had been processed through a joint account in a way that had tax implications. My mother-in-law had suggested at the time that it was better to run certain things through family accounts for efficiency. I hadn't thought much of it then. I should have, but I was busy and I trusted that the people around me were acting in good faith. As it turned out, Some of those improvements were documented in ways that had my name attached to them as a contributing party to the property. My accountant flagged it and passed it to my lawyer. My lawyer had more to say. I won't get into the details of what Ontario property law looks like in a situation like this, but I'll say this. When you contribute documented funds to a property over an extended period, and when some of those contributions are recorded in ways that suggest a financial interest, and when you have 14 months of bank statements and a paper trail that would make an accountant smile, you have options. I didn't want the house. I want to be clear about that. I didn't want to live there. I didn't want to fight for it. I didn't want anything that had their names on it. What I wanted was to not have $75,000 simply disappear into someone else's equity. We didn't go to court. My lawyer sent a letter. It was polite and precise, and it's explained in the kind of language that makes people go quiet, exactly what I could establish if we pursued a formal claim. It suggested an alternative. Reimbursement structured over a reasonable period in exchange for a full release of any future interest in the property. My mother-in-law received the letter on a Thursday. Owen called me that afternoon. He didn't sound angry anymore. He sounded tired. He said, "She doesn't understand what's happening," I said. "Have her read the letter again. Your name is in the second paragraph, for reference." He asked if I was really going to do this. I said I already had. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he hadn't known it would end up like this. I told him the truth. I said neither had I, but you chose not to ask, Owen. Every month for 14 months, money moved from my account into that household, and you never once sat down and asked me what this was costing me. Not financially, not in any way. You let me disappear into the walls of that house the same way your mother decided I was interchangeable with empty space. He didn't have an answer for that. We filed for divorce 4 months later. It was quiet, the way things are when there's nothing left to fight about. He stayed at the house for a while, then didn't. Nathan and his girlfriend ended up moving to a smaller place outside the city. My mother-in-law stopped hosting the Sunday dinners she'd been so proud of. The house sold the following spring. I don't know what she netted after the reimbursement agreement. I don't actually care. I received what I was owed, transferred in 3 installments, every one of which arrived on time because my lawyer had structured it very carefully. I used part of it to furnish my apartment properly. A real couch this time, one I chose alone, in a color no one else got to weigh in on. A kitchen table for 2, because I don't need a table for 6 right now, and I'm done buying things at a size meant to impress other people. Art on the walls, a good coffee maker again, because the first one left with me and I deserved an upgrade anyway. I work. I cook dinner most nights and I eat it at my own table, and I don't explain my choices to anyone. On weekends I see my friends, some of whom I'd lost touch with during those 2 years in Scarborough when I was always too busy keeping a household afloat to have much left over for anything else. What I want to say, if I'm being honest, is that I don't think my mother-in-law is a villain in a movie. I think she's a woman who never had to think carefully about where money came from, who assumed the comfortable life of her household was just the natural state of things, and who made the very human mistake of treating a useful person like a permanent fixture instead of a person who could choose to leave. She didn't think removing me would cost her anything. She was wrong about that. And me? I signed my lease renewal last month. I paid it myself, the same way I've paid for everything in this apartment. Not quietly, not with held breath, but easily, gladly. Because it's mine. And there's no favor being done, no ledger being kept, no smile I owe anyone for the privilege of having a home. I wasn't pushed out, not in the end. I walked out carrying everything that belonged to me, and I haven't needed to look back once.